Hello, welcome back to the Living Process. My name is Greg Madison, and my guest this time is Russell Delman. Russell is very well known within the focusing community, the Feldenkrais community, and beyond. Russell brings together his training in Feldenkrais and his training in Zen practice, and also an awareness that we would be very used to in focusing practice. And Russell actually met Gendlin many years ago, and they had a very warm personal relationship and also a practice together. So, in the episode today, Russell talks a little bit about his interactions with Gene, but about much more, and sort of about the importance of the physicality of the body and the importance of awareness, the importance of presence. And even near the end of the episode, we talk a little bit about how you bring this kind of a practice into a world that may require action or some kind of participation, and how to join in with what is needed in the world since we're a part of it without just becoming enraged or ineffective. So, I hope you really enjoy this episode. I really did. I enjoyed meeting Russell. It was the first time that we had ever met. And I hope someday that we'll be able to shake hands in person. Um, it was a very enjoyable episode, and I hope you also enjoy it. The Living Process with Russell Delman. Thank you.
And there we go.
Oh, yes.
Hello, hello.
Hi, Russell.
Hey,
I recognize you
yes, from pictures on the website or something.
and watching a few videos.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Mm,
So thank you very, very much for meeting with me. Yeah, it's a pleasure to look forward to talking with you.
yeah, I've been looking forward to meeting you, and I'm grateful. I don't watch a lot of podcasts and stuff, but the ones I've seen of your interviews, I've been very taken with the atmosphere you create and the connections that you make. So that's been a great gift.
Well, thank you. So, yeah, welcome. Um, I have my dog here and I have people working in my garden, so I'm hoping that's not going to interfere.
Right? I hope I can meet your dog.
That's what you will probably, you'll see him wandering around in the background, I'm
That's great.
sure. So the thing that I like to ask first, with you, it's slightly different because I normally ask focusing people, like, how did you get into focusing? Um, but you're more than a focusing person. I think you incorporate what we know from focusing, but you also incorporate a lot of other things. So I'm curious just about your development. Like, how did you get interested in the things you're interested in?
Mm, yeah, yeah. So, I mean, the long story goes back to my mother, but I'll
Right?
literally. I mean, I'll do it briefly. She was very challenged, back in the 50s as a woman living in suburban New York, and had she was quite intuitive, quite developed, and manic depressive, and really struggling in many ways. And we developed early on a unique relationship where I could listen to her in a way that was comforting to her, and in a way that my dad couldn't and my brother couldn't. And it was just karma or whatever. It was just, and then the really strange thing is she would tell me, "Oh, my calves are so tight," and I would rub her calves. And she would say, "Oh, you have the best hands. You're going to be an osteopath someday." And I would say, "No, Mom, I want to be a psychiatrist," because she was seeing psychiatrists all the time.
Mhm.
And so that kind of laid the groundwork for, unbeknownst to me until much later, to a serious interest in body, mind, in what happened in human experience. And of course, that was not conscious for many years.
Mhm.
But that's really the origin story. And then the second, oh, hi, dog. Hello. And the second origin story is really as a freshman in college at university, I knew I wanted to study psychology, and I had my first broken heart. I had a love relationship that it was the first time I felt really consciously wounded in my heart.
Mhm.
And what came of that were two rather remarkable coincident things. I was taking a psychology course in which the professor was interested in human potential. And we had an article by Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, who wrote Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, that many people know. I read the article and bam, I said, I'm going to start meditating. And I just sat and started sitting. That's 50 something years ago. It just grabbed me. And I don't quite understand how or why.
Mhm.
And the thing that got really clear, so that was the first. And the second thing with this broken heart, and I'm sitting, was I got aware that I was lost in my head most of the time. That I could go to class, I could even ride my motorcycle, I could function as a normal person, but it was the first time I got aware of the internal dialogue that was almost incessant and full of judgments and full of what did I do wrong, or all the things somebody with a broken heart might go through. So the combination of starting to sit and be alone with my own process, my own world,
Mhm.
and recognizing that, oh my God, when I eat, I might taste the first bite and not be there the rest of the time.
Mhm.
And I was not quite aware at the time that this was true of a lot of people, or maybe most, but it really stood out to me that what the Zen folks were talking about being present, and my living experience of being so, I would say 95% of the time absent,
Mhm.
just struck me. And that really is the second origin story, I would say, for my interest in, and then getting aware. I was a pretty physical guy, sports and stuff. Getting aware that, and this is emphasized in Zen, that if I could feel my body, I had a doorway to the present moment. And so I'd be on my motorcycle. Okay, I'm here now. Can you feel your breath? So I started using the meditation instructions to bring it into everyday life. And I realized, oh, this is the key for me.
Mhm.
So that all came quite early.
I I'm moved by the first part of the story, and I suspect for most of us in the kinds of practices that you and I are interested in, um, it goes a long way back.
Mm,
Um, it sounded to me almost like maybe partly because of your early experiences that your interest initially, understandably, would go towards psychiatry and psychology.
yeah.
But then when you became interested in yourself, it sounded like it took a turn towards practice.
Mm,
Is
yeah.
that right?
Yeah. I would say that is right. What there was a kind of desperation, Greg, I think, in this young guy when I look back at him at that time, um, to kind of make sense of living.
Yeah.
You know, it was like something opened. And, I have to also acknowledge that this was, 69, 70, 71, where psychedelics were starting in my world.
Mhm.
And not that I did a lot of them, but some that opened the doors of perception
Mhm.
and the kind of self-inquiry that was like, oh my God,
Mhm.
I am really missing the boat here.
Mhm.
And that's daunting.
Yeah.
And so practice became essential for sanity, we could say. I mean, I don't think I was going insane, but colloquially. And then the body connection, though that really resonated. And that's why I then moved toward yoga and Feldenkrais became my teacher and all like that. It's because it all fit together with Zen, embodiment, being present, being here.
Mhm.
It's really, as I talk to you about it, I haven't put it in these terms before, but it's coming now. I would call that an existential crisis
Yeah.
for that young. Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds like it. And it's interesting how the body aspect of it became important for you because I think for a lot of people that strand doesn't become so prominent. And I'm curious, was it just the sports or what was it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So let me take that fresh. Uh, I was very lucky. Again, I mentioned this professor at university who was interested in human potential things, and from the meditation, I got quite close to him, and I went to this place called the Esalen Institute in California, where a lot of this stuff was really percolating in the 60s and 70s, and was drawn to Gestalt workshops, did two of them along with like Gestalt yoga and meditation. Gestalt, and so it was all right there. And again, I think it's luck, karma, and I don't know what that I was drawn
Mhm.
to these. And so with the Gestalt work, I was drawn to, there's an emphasis on present moment experience, so it's very congruent with the Zen and how it feels in your body. Not in the same way as focusing, but a kind of towards that direction.
Yeah.
And so there I was, 19 years old, doing these seminars. And really, I can say what I call the embodied life work that I do now was I can point right there and go, oh, I'm really doing something very similar to that, that, and that. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's yeah. That's that it strikes me as an uncommon combination.
Mm.
And I'm curious, partly because I know so little about it, I'm curious how it led to the Feldenkrais work.
Yeah. 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 So I'll say a little bit about that. So Moshe Feldenkrais was a man born in what today is Ukraine, temporarily maybe, but is Ukraine, and he was an amazing human being. I mean, we say that a lot, but I'm not exaggerating. He left home at 14, witnessed pogroms of Russian soldiers killing Jews. He was Jewish. His two of his grandfathers were famous rabbis. He was not particularly Jewish, a religious Jewish. He was very Jewish identified. And he went on this trip with villagers to Palestine, and so that would be like 1918, and helped build Tel Aviv, and was a very strong physical guy. From a British colonel, he learned some jujitsu, and he was part of the Jewish boys defending the beach in Tel Aviv. His first two books were on unarmed combat because they weren't allowed to carry knives. And he developed, so he was doing all that, very physical. He was also really smart. He earned money as a tutor, went to the Sorbonne in Paris and an engineering school there, was in the Curie laboratory doing radioactive research. I mean, really high level stuff. And he started the Paris Judo School because he gave one of his books to the man who developed modern day judo, Professor Kano from Japan, who was doing a demonstration in Paris. He gets a guy to give him his book, and Kano says, this move for taking a knife away from somebody would never work. So he had Feldenkrais demonstrate it, and they added it to the judo curriculum, and they gave him private lessons in judo so that he could open the judo school in Paris while he's in this high level laboratory, and escapes with the radioactive research when the Nazis come into Paris, goes to UK and lives with scientists doing research on how to predict the invasion patterns of Japan, of the Germans. It goes on and on. So he had this incredible diversity of talent, from really smart, really physical, and creative thinker. And again, we could do this whole show about his history, but that, so he developed out of injuries of his own, he developed a way of basically healing himself when he was told that the knee surgeries he would need could leave him limping. So he actually healed. I mean, he didn't have any ligaments left. That the collateral ligament was gone. But he managed to walk, managed to function, managed to live, and he did that through applying awareness to his own movement. And he developed a work called the Feldenkrais method that has two parts. One is called awareness through movement, which are thousands of mostly slow movement lessons, learning to re-educate the nervous system for motor patterns, and hands-on work called functional integration. You can work with everybody from very injured people, out of brain injured people, people with orthopedic injuries. We've trained a lot of physical therapists, all the way to musicians. Yehudi Menuhin studied with him, very talented athletes. So it's the full spectrum of people learning to function better. And he was just brilliant in creating this. And I was very lucky. When I was at Esalen, a friend mentioned, if you ever get to study with this guy, Moshe Feldenkrais, he's the leading edge for the things you're interested in. And then a couple of years later, I was living in San Francisco, and I saw a notice that he was doing his first professional training in San Francisco starting in 1975. And so I joined it. Didn't know much about the work, just that he was highly recommended. And again, I feel like I was lucky, blessed, whatever you want to call it, to be in this direction. I had intentionally not read more about his work because this is kind of the early 70s where there was a kind of anti-intellectual, don't try to understand things in thought, experience them. So I said, okay, I don't want to go in with a lot of preconceived ideas. I want to just see what it's like. And so I was blown out, and that became my profession. That's how I earned money in the world, leading training, well, having a private practice, then leading training programs for many years. And on the side of that, I was also teaching meditation and working a little bit with what I'd gotten through Gestalt work. So I was starting to develop ideas about how mind, body, and inner inquiry could work.
It sounds like you were quite naturally beginning to play with the integration of these different
Exactly. Exactly. The gift, Greg, was that I saw that awareness, being present and awareness was the key to everything I was interested in, going back to the original insight
Mhm.
and how our embodiment not only could bring us into presence, but could also reveal what was living within us. So, well before I knew about focusing,
Mhm.
that direction was alive. And later on, through a mutual friend, a very wonderful rabbi named Zalman Schachter, who was a very well known rabbi, died a few years ago. He was friends with Gene, and he came to me for Feldenkrais sessions, and we got to be friends where Zalman was wild. He would say, you know why? You know why all the young Jews are going to the Eastern religion? It's because they experience something. They experience something. These old rabbis are dead. They're talking from their head. They don't know what. And, and so he would invite me to teach. He said, Russell, you come out Friday night, you do a little of this, get them breathing, get them moving, makes my work much easier. So I used to go to his seminars, his retreats, and teach Friday night and then leave. And because I was not a practicing Jew or anything, we just had a nice connection. So he connected me with Gene. He said, you got to call Gene Gendlin. You're hearing the same muse. You're hearing he was also from Vienna, from Eastern Europe.
Okay.
You're hearing the same muse. So I go, Zalman, I don't call people. I'm a little shy in that way. So after about a year of him saying this, I finally called Gene out of the blue and we connected.
I'm curious. Yeah, I'm curious about that. That's that's a nice story. I'm curious about well, I'm curious about two things. Before we get to the connection with Gene, what was it in the Feldenkrais that really spoke to you? Because the way you described it, and again, I know hardly anything about it. The way you described it, it sounds like quite a very focused on the physicality
Mm.
and almost like a healing modality. And I'm wondering what was it that,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a insightful question. So from Feldenkrais's point of view,
Hmm.
it was really a learning modality. He liked to differentiate. It was healing, but he was saying, this is not therapy. This is not, healing is a byproduct of learning.
Hmm.
And the learning was that your nervous system was, before it was well known, he was talking about the plasticity of the nervous system for learning new patterns. He came up with that back in the 30s and 40s. And he was saying, we don't have to be stuck in our past learning. So he had done some psychotherapy as a client. He was also some Alexander work.
Hmm.
He was also interested in how, well, let me say it this way. Yeah, it's actually touching to talk about because somehow I'm seeing it all freshly sitting here with you. Um, I'm seeing his face. So Moshe got very interested, Moshe Feldenkrais, Moshe got very interested in how awareness is the key to learning new patterns of behavior, not only new patterns of movement, new patterns of behavior. How you, and he saw really clearly that our physical body was the infrastructure for our self-image, our thoughts, and our feelings. He saw the totality of that. And he said, we can work through the physical body at a deeper level than verbal work
Hmm.
because we get to the infrastructure of the breathing patterns, the sitting patterns, the how you stand.
Hmm.
So he got very interested in how to work with the totality of the human being so that he could get to his main interest, which was freedom. How awareness can lead you to making really new choices about your life. And I think this came very much from, right, he was living in Israel by this time. He came back from the war, was good friends with Ben Gurion, the first president. He was seeing the people come back from the concentration camps. He was, who were the people who were able to survive these environments? He got passionate about that. And he said, what do we need to, and this is very germane to the world today, to have people thinking for themselves,
Yeah.
to the gift of autonomy, the gift of agency, the gift of the I in the human being. How do we support that? I mean, he didn't use that language exactly, but freedom was his main goal for humanity. And so he saw it really in such an integrated way that working through the body was working with that person.
That sounds fascinating to me. I want to say it back to you, knowing that I'm going to miss a lot of it. But first of all, it reminds me a little bit of Reich, the Reichian ideas of character armor and all that sort of thing, that working deeply with the physicality of the person is in some way working with the whole person, much more than working with just what they say.
Mm.
Um, but the important thing that you just said, one of the important things is the foundational aspect, it sounds like, is awareness itself, but not, oh, this is what it's a question really. I'm not reflecting, I'm asking. When you talk about the importance of awareness, I instinctively agree with that. But it sounds like you're not just saying awareness, you're saying awareness of the concrete physicality. There's something about the combination of the two. Is that right?
Mm. Yeah. So often people who are interested in awareness kind of jump over the body.
Yeah, exactly.
They become aware of their thoughts, if they're thinkers, aware of their emotions, if they tend to be feelers. And I always like to say the thinker and the feeler tend to get married and have a hard time talking to each other. But the missing link so often is that embodied presence.
Mhm.
And so his emphasis on finding, do do you walk, are your shoulders, do they tend to be lifted and your chest compressed, or are you in the, Trumpian pattern of that, or, and how are you embodying, and can your nervous system learn new ways of carrying yourself?
Mhm.
He was not so interested in working with the emotional awarenesses that came out of that.
Mhm.
That's something that some of us, as his legacy, have added. That was not intrinsic to Feldenkrais method, maybe a missing piece in Feldenkrais method. But and probably part of why the Feldenkrais method has been adopted mostly in the world of physical improvement and less in the more global way. But you mentioned Reich. It's so interesting. He was teaching at Esalen at one point in 1972. He was brought over by kind of the bigwigs there because they had heard about him, and he had these major arguments with the Reichian, or the bioenergetic people, the people who were all into working it through the body, and he said, human beings are not steam engines where they have this pent up energy. So that whole concept is wrong. We have to look at this brilliant brain and how it gets into patterns. And so he was talking from a totally different model. And I don't I think there is value to the Reichian perspective, bioenergetic perspective, to the view of pent up this, pent up that. But he loved to ask, not to ask, to point out people's primitive thinking, he would call it, and and really challenge people. I mean, that was my first experience of him in the San Francisco training. Was he would challenge, we would say something. A lot of us were hippies or this or that, and we'd talk, oh, the energy flowing through after a lesson. What's energy? Do you know what you're talking about? Tell me what this energy is that you're. He would just,
Yeah.
because our thinking was very primitive, I would say.
It makes me wonder if he was interested in the concreteness of the physical body, but he wasn't interested in concrete thinking.
Yeah, yeah, nice distinction. Nice distinction. One of the great gifts that I think he brings, and I don't know that it's appreciated enough, it certainly was central for me, was to question your beliefs, was to be able to, that unless you can look at something from at least three and at least, and ideally at least 5 points of view,
Mhm.
your thought is not free.
Mhm.
That if you can only see this perspective on something, you're seeing out of your conditioning.
Yeah.
You're seeing out of your cultural or family or personal conditioning. If you want a free thought, you need to be able to look from multiple views, but
Mhm.
then not get paralyzed in your action. It's not that everything becomes equal. It becomes, he loved Rousseau's comment, until you can argue passionately from your from the other's point of view, you don't really understand your own.
Yes.
Isn't that brilliant?
That is fantastic. Yeah. Yeah, no, I love that. It reminds me of times when I have purposely tried to think something through from the opposite point of view
Mm,
and noticed what difference does it make in my body? Does it make me feel more alive or more sort of expansive or less?
mm,
Often it makes me feel more expansive, and I don't think it's because that reframing is necessarily true,
mm,
but it stops me from being trapped in the previous,
mm,
as you say, conditioning or sort of way of thinking. The other thing that you were saying that I want to just jump back to for a second, if I've understood you, it makes me also remember times when I could be walking down the street and notice that I'm walking in a particular way and consciously change my walking and notice what a shift it makes in my whole kind of experience of myself.
mm, mm,
And I'm thinking as focusers, sometimes we can then become very interested in that change of experience, the kind of the almost the emotionality or the felt sense of it, and not appreciate just the opening
mm, mm.
comes.
Brilliant,
Yeah.
brilliant. Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
Can we go back to when you met Jean and sort of I'm wondering because you're coming from complementary but slightly different angles, I'm wondering how that worked for the two of you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Again, I get to go into memory, and Jean is so. Yeah, I feel like I can have these intimate pictures of Moshe, and now Gene comes in, and
Yeah.
it's great to have him in the room while we talk. And yeah, so I called him out of the blue, and part of the motivation, as I said, was Zalman encouragement, but also what happened. I was teaching in Munich, and I was doing what I called Embodied Life seminars, which had a lot of Feldenkrais movement, had meditation, and had what I called guided inquiry, where I would guide people to listening to how their body is, how their life is living in their bodily experience. And I had a woman come up to me who turns out she was a focusing teacher and gave me a book on focusing and said that, no, actually gave me, it wasn't Jean's book, it was excerpts from Ann Weiser Cornell, one of her things, and said, you must know focusing. I said, no, I don't. What is it? I've heard of Gene Gendlin through a friend. He goes, well, what you're teaching is so similar. And I said, really? And so then I read that and I said, wow, there's a lot of overlap. So that was also part of my motivation in finally calling Gene. So we got together, went to his house in Westchester, and we just hit it off really in a lovely way. He was an amazing, as you know, I'm sure, an amazing listener.
Hmm.
I don't think I've ever been with anybody who had that capacity for not only empathy, but really, really taking in what you were trying to say.
Hmm.
And and he had this amazing ability. I mean, he was so brilliant. You know, I don't consider myself especially smart. He was brilliant, and yet you could talk to him and you felt like he was there learning from you.
Yeah.
Amazing experience. He always had these legal pads next to him. And he would, oh, wait a second. He'd pull his legal, can you say that again? Say that in another way. And I'd leave there feeling like, wow, I felt so seen
Hmm.
and valued that it really said, no, there's something here. Yeah, I'm onto something, but this guy is taking it much further. And so I got really interested in, I then studied with Ann Weiser Cornell, and she and Jean became my committee for becoming a focusing, uh, whatever they're called. And so I would meet with him, and I took her for, what are they called? Not segments, for
Levels.
levels. There we go. And that opening to the focusing world showed me two main things. One, I was on the right, I was in a very good direction, and boy, did I have a lot more to learn. Because it was clearly so much more sophisticated, so much more articulated, so much more teachable, so much mores.
I could imagine, especially with Anne and Jean, that you might find new ways of teaching.
Mm.
But it's not clear to me what you would have picked up that was new, because it seems like you
Oh,
were so much in that direction.
yeah, yeah. So, yeah, let me let me see how to articulate that. Mm. Yeah, so the language of felt sensing open new territory. The emphasis on feeling in your core, of the specificity that he could bring, the specificity of language, which became early on with a passion of mine, learning through him.
Mhm.
The I think it's David Bohm maybe who says something that's very important to me is language not only describes, it creates. Language not only describes experience, it creates experience. I'm adding that word to it.
Yeah.
When we get that,
Mhm.
it's a remarkable opening to say, finding the precise way it actually feels in there
Mhm.
is not only getting it right or something, it's furthering it.
Yeah.
It's helping it go forward in life energy. That was new for me and so beautifully articulated by Jean that I felt like a whole world opened.
That's interesting. Yeah, that so there was something about the creative aspect of carrying forward.
Yeah, the creative aspect of carrying forward the radical emphasis on pausing,
Hmm.
which was a little bit there for me, but not nearly as emphasized. I really needed that support, that encouragement. Especially when you're teaching, the you don't like to have a lot of dead space. You're going forward. You're bringing new things, but to learn, oh, this is not only good; it's essential
Hmm.
for people to really get what's going on inside and to be encouraged to what we say in Zen, turn the light around,
Yeah.
turn the light from looking outside to looking in. And so that deepened things so much for me. And I think for people studying with me, just like I felt permission to pause and wait and see and listen, it gave them much more permission, which is a revolutionary thing in most dialogue.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, I know for me when I'm teaching, I often point out when I'm pausing that it's not that I just don't know what to say next.
mm.
It's not like I've just dried up.
Right, right.
It's that there's so much to say that I have to pause and wait and see what should come next.
Yeah,
Um,
beautiful.
but let me ask you, um, there's so many things I want to ask you, but this feels like a leap, but I'll take it anyway.
Go
Uh,
ahead.
I'm curious. Well, one thing that um, I'm not sure about that might be different in the focusing world and might be something about focusing that needs a little more thought, perhaps, is that in the focusing world, the setup is often a dyad. There's often a focuser and a listener. And I'm wondering if in your work, the way it's developing, if you set things up like that as well, or yeah, how you
Yeah,
practice.
yeah. I still think that dyads are incredibly helpful for
Hmm.
most people.
Hmm.
I think I do, as most people do, I do teach a kind of self-focusing, and I do a lot of self-focusing myself.
Hmm.
And I really appreciate that what once one gets experience through dyad work, how much that can help the self-focusing. I'm very interested, Greg, in the power of taking a focusing attitude in everyday life, and that not to think of focusing as a 20 or 30-minute session.
Yeah.
Think of it as a way of living that also sometimes includes those longer sessions where you can get more depth and more information and more guidance. But for me, I don't want to overlook that attitudinal shift of listening and everyday life, just kind of checking in. And when you get some dyad experience, that really helps that to
Hmm.
become something real. I think you kind of get on that wavelength, so to speak. So I do like the dyad setup. I do also encourage a lot of self-listening. And one of the pieces we started to get to a little bit a while ago, I think, when we were talking about walking down the street in different ways. Um, I think one of the uh, gifts of presence is just to be present. Just that life is a gift right now,
Mhm.
sitting here with you in this moment. I'm sitting in this chair. I know I'm here. I can go toward, if we took some more time, the felt sensing of this moment and get more detail about that. But I want to argue for that initial experience of just being alive in this physical body, in this moment. There's always an environment in every moment. There's always a physical body in every moment. And to open to the gift of that, that is the language isn't right, but it's close. It almost precedes the interest in the felt sensing of the moment.
Mhm.
To just have this and have it be engaging and enough,
Mhm.
and then sometimes pause a little longer and go deeper into the felt sense of it.
Mhm.
But it's like the felt sense is already there in a certain way, not articulated, and it's just here in being present in your physical body and being alive. And I don't want to skip over that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I don't even know if I'm making sense for you.
Well, yeah, let me say it back to you. It does make sense, definitely to me, intuitively. And I want to just check whether my version of it is what you're pointing at. Um, because I do definitely value that sense of, first of all, simply bringing my awareness to myself, whatever a self is. For me, I usually start with my physical body and then go a little bit beyond it and then a little bit more beyond it. And there's something about the beyond that somehow invites my body into a larger context.
Mm, mm,
And I don't want to be honest, I want to focus from there
mm,
more than focusing in a kind of a
mm. Yeah,
getting too small down inside of myself. I
yes,
really want the space around it.
yeah,
I think
yeah,
that's similar to what you're saying, and
yeah,
not going into the focusing stance too quickly.
yeah, yeah. Nicely put. Yeah, we are inseparable from this space that we're meeting in, both the space with you right now and your room and the space that I'm physically in, my room, are part of this interaction, part of my beingness in this
Mhm.
moment, inseparable.
Mhm.
And it's so easy to think that the essence of this moment is what I'm saying or what I'm feeling, when the essence of this moment is much bigger than that, although it includes those, of course.
Mhm. Mhm.
But if we emphasize too much the inner
Yeah.
experience, there is a kind of, it's almost like a seduction
Mhm.
of a certain level of experience.
Mhm.
And what I want to say, and this is not meant as a criticism of focus. I hope you get how much I appreciate and love and value.
Mhm.
But as much as there is a valuable distinction between felt sensing and usual emotions, or felt sensing and particular wavelengths of feeling, it's very easy for focusers, I feel, to get so interested in that feeling level of experience using felt sensing language, and it is a felt, but it's somehow not inclusive enough at times, as brilliant as it is,
Yeah.
right? So I'm trying to walk a fence here that is
Yeah.
understood and not misunderstood.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I would invite you even more so onto one side of that fence in a moment. Um, for me, a concern I have about focusing, it might be very similar to what you're describing. It's that we can get a little bit seduced by kind of the next step. We're kind of
Mm,
looking for
mm,
where is this going? And it can be sort of a narrow channel in a way
mm.
rather than a larger context.
Yes.
And the narrow channel is already a preconception somewhat. And for me, I think focusing is very powerful when you almost take a step back and begin to pay attention to the way you frame the whole thing
Mm,
so that
mm,
the focusing process becomes wider and wider rather than kind of being pulled down further and further, which can also be very useful.
mm, mm,
But
mm,
sometimes you can get a felt shift that sort of really opens you up again.
mm,
And in focusing, I think we don't stay with that long enough. Kind of
beautiful.
looking for what's the next step of trouble or what needs
All
attention.
right. Yeah, that's so great. That's so. Let me make an analogy here, which I think from our conversation should make sense. When I was talking about Feldenkrais, and I was talking about his big vision of freedom of the human being,
Mhm.
and that because it is so good therapeutically for dealing with pain and dealing with physical limitation, it gets condensed to a kind of sophisticated physical therapy.
Yeah.
I see something like that in the focusing world because it has such great therapeutic applications. It's bigger livingness of the the joy of being alive, the just this is enough very often. And that, of course, I come to through Zen practice and the uh, the gift of present moment awareness that isn't particularly feeling based, isn't, but it's not ignoring feeling. It's
Mhm.
not particularly thought based. It's not particularly forward, where are we going next? It's really, we're here together. That's, I mean, I can get a little corny sounding. This is love. This is a love of life. This is a gift of life, and to not turn it into how do I get better,
Yeah.
or what's the next thing, or what's wrong with me. Oh, I should have this more often. Let me look at that.
Yeah.
Is a real error of a brilliant something that is often brilliant gets compressed in an unhelpful way.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. And as I was listening to you, I was thinking the feeling sense is still there. It just becomes slightly more subtle.
Yeah,
Um,
that's right.
yeah, it's not absent.
It's not absent at all. It's
Yeah.
not it's implicit,
Yeah.
and it's it's there.
Hmm.
It's not needing to be articulated
Hmm.
all the time. It can be, but there's juice. There's juice there. I don't need to say what kind of juice it is right now. I can feel the juice.
The thing for me is in that sort of a state, if you can call it a state, what becomes interesting to me is rather than articulating the felt sense, how do you articulate that state?
mm,
Like how can there be a kind of an understanding of that beingness
mm.
without it be in any way restricting the beingness?
Yeah, yeah. So this is it's really the cutting edge in the world of Zen. Actually, is you start articulating, and the Zen master wants to wash your mouth out with soap or something, and and yet the value of articulating is sometimes missed in that world.
Yeah.
So they use this kind of inscrutable language very often, or confusing ways to try to not get you to fall into old mental patterns that then bring you into your history as opposed to your presence. So that's part of the function of strange speech, we could say. And Gene recognized that in his own way when he would differentiate public language from, what's alive in your experience that can be accurately from the point of view of in there,
Hmm.
right? Can be said. But what is it? So back to your question, what is it? So yeah, it's a beautiful edge to be on, and this kind of where my experience of Zen and my experience of focusing meet, and how they're different and aligned and work together and need some barrier between them. Like when I'm teaching in my training programs, how people who are adept with the focusing element want to bring that into their meditation. I say, whoa, wait a second. We need a kind of not a firm line, but we need it's kind of like a corpus callosum that connects and separates at the same time. And then the people who are more the Zen folks, and they are less comfortable at first getting into their felt sensing and all like that, how they need encouragement not to turn focusing into another kind of meditation. Oh yes, I'm feeling that. I know. They need to kind of loosen the grip of traditional zazen or something. So, so it's a very familiar edge for me. And in everyday life, it kind of plays like that. It plays like, there's nothing to say, and now it wants some words. Now it wants some expression. It's part of my passion for poetry. It wants you a unique expression, or sometimes it just wants a hug, or it just wants a big smile
Hmm.
of the gratitude for being alive just in this moment, and the irrepeatable that this is unique and we're here.
Hmm.
And how did that happen? I don't know, but I'm just going to celebrate and continue being here.
I mean, that does, I'm curious if this is true for you. For me, the kinds of practices that I think you're talking about and my focusing practice, it it does lead me to, I don't think it leads everyone. It depends on, I guess, the purpose for the practice for each person. But for me, it does lead to questions of what is this?
Mm,
Like, what is
mm,
this? What is it? Why does awareness make such a
mm,
difference? What is awareness? And is it
mm.
mine or am I its? Or, I'm
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
curious
yeah.
if you get in that territory, what you make of it.
Well, let me start with a story.
Mm.
So there was this is a true story. There was a conference, a Buddhist conference, and there was a Theravedic Vipassana oriented teacher, mindfulness and all. There was a Tibetan teacher, and there was a Zen teacher. The Zen teacher was a Japanese guy who I had actually studied a little bit with, and he picks up an orange and he goes, "What is this?" what is this? He's kind of samurai, Rinzai's, what is this? The Tibetan guy goes to the Vipassana guy and says, they don't have oranges in Japan? Right? So, so we can get a little bit out there with what is it really,
Yeah.
you know? But for me, though that really, that level of questioning rarely exists.
Mhm.
There really is, how do I want to say that? There's just such gratitude for the moments of being alive,
Mhm.
whether it's myself. I live near the ocean here on Cape Cod, whether it's myself out there or in my yard or with my wife or daughter or you right now or what, that those moments are so rich. Um, yeah, I guess I get interested when there's interference in my capacity for presence.
Mhm.
And presence can include being really sad, can include, you know, I just had a call yesterday with the Embodied Life community looking at the elections in Germany and what's happening in America and saying, how do you live with a truly open and grateful heart and include the cries of the world?
Mhm.
How do we ordinary people grow enough space in our bodies, in our field, to not fall into the the dark forces that want us to live in fear and alienation and separation, and yet not go blind to that? How to have our hearts break open and not closed,
Mhm.
and what that's like for ordinary people like us, that we can include our concerns and yet be unwilling to fall into living in fear.
Mhm.
And the difference between being enraged or being outraged.
Mhm.
And I got to say, in a focusing just a few days ago with a focusing partner, that distinction, which is very fresh for me, was really important because I know it's not healthy for people to live in anger
Mhm.
and live in rage, that doesn't help the world and doesn't help the person.
Yeah.
But when I got to this distinction about the healthiness of outrage, that is a sustainable, I think of Gandhi, and when
Mhm.
I was in India I was very interested in what he brought into the world, and I've gone back to looking at how he was able to maintain this powerful dedication to truth. And he was outraged, but he was not enraged.
Mhm.
Is such a difference. People who get enraged get burnt out. People who
Mhm.
get outraged can stay the course. And I just learned from a German student yesterday that the German word for that has an uprightness to it, that there is the difference between an uprising
Mhm.
and a, well, you know, it has that energy in it.
Yeah.
And I'm not exactly sure why I'm going in that direction at this
Well,
moment.
yeah,
It's
I'm
kind
glad. I'm glad you are. I want to follow up on it. It's not. It wasn't one of my kind of questions, but I'm glad you're taking us here. Um, immediately, it it makes me think of a distinction between um, rightness and righteousness.
Mm, nice.
That there can be a sense of what's right without the kind of self-righteous certainty that I'm right.
Right.
Uh, um, but I'm curious, how do you carry that forward in a way that honors what you've learned from the practices so you don't just fall into the same kinds of rage and, you know, fear and everything else, and yet you also don't end up in a kind of a pacifist sort of inaction, a quietude. How
Mm,
do you somehow bring the development from the practice into the world in a way
mm,
that you can have some kind of a presence that feels like your integrity as a member of the species is also enacted?
yeah, yeah. It's really challenging, important question.
Yeah.
Um, mm. the I recognize how essential it is that. No, I want to start differently. So I spoke before about how awareness can lead toward freedom. That was Feldenkrais's basic thing. I want to extend that in my understanding. I see a direct line from embodiment to being present, right? Like I spoke to my original sense of I'm here now.
Mhm.
That being present is a precondition, but not the same as being aware.
Mhm.
Presence opens that door. We can go through it or not. So embodiment opens a door to presence. Presence opens a door to awareness. And awareness opens a door to freedom. You don't necessarily go through those doors, but there's a kind of that's my experience with that. So so the power of moving from embodiment to presence to awareness, the what happens between presence and awareness is our attention. What do we bring attention to, and how do we bring that attention? We're present and we're moving toward awareness. What is the segue there? It's how am I attending to the world? How am I attending to myself? Which includes what are the stories I'm telling myself about the world and myself. So once I see that, I go, oh, okay. It is really important that I don't fall into the storyline of how terrible everything is in the world, that I remember that we are living in a time when there are higher percentage of people being fed on the planet than ever, that women have more rights around the world than ever, that there are a lot of really great things happening in the world. So I'm not going to fall into everything is going to hell.
Mhm.
And I'm not going to keep telling that story to my friends
Mhm.
because we share a field of consciousness that we are all contributing to. So seeing that, I go, okay, I really want to own my attention, which means I have so much to be grateful for right now in this moment. And I'm not going to give that up because I'm really worried about Trump and Musk and the ADF and all the things in the world. Okay, so then how to do that? Well, one part is really underlining my agency, my power to use my attention, which is the greatest gift of human beings, that we co-create our perceived world. And And my attention is part of that. Okay, I'm not going to give up my joy because I also have sorrow.
Mhm.
I'm not going to give up my gratitude for this moment because I'm also worried about this. That I need to get bigger
Mhm.
spatially in my body, in my perception, so that I can live in the paradoxes.
Mhm.
And once I get that, and paradox was central to Feldenkrais and central to Zen, central to understanding how opposites can be true. How, I mean, if you want to drive people crazy, you can tell them Hitler is the founding father of Israel. Oh my God, you want to drive people crazy? Say something like that. And but if you look at it historically, there's something in that. So so how do we honor the gift of being alive and hear the cries of the world and feel for for the I'm in a privileged enough position that I'm not directly being hurt by what Trump is doing yet.
Mhm.
And I feel for people who I see and know who are really threatened in their life
Mhm.
right now. And then I feel for, without taking political positions, there are people suffering in Ukraine and there are people suffering right now in Somalia who are being hurt because of changes in where money's going from the US. And and so how to feel for that and yet maintain the choice to also, not in place of, but also have the gratitude and joy and love that's implicit when we are awake in the ways that we get to be awake. And it's a practice. It's literally a practice. But this was very much part of my community call yesterday. We affect each other and we want to tell the truth about our fears and our concerns, but consciousness accelerates in groups and grows, and we can leave each other feeling, oh wow, I really needed to say all that, but now there's more fear in the world.
Mhm.
Now there's
Mhm.
so we need to be really make good choices about how we use our attention, how we use our language, and not be Pollyanna, everything's going to be okay, don't worry about it, life unfolds. Not that,
Mhm.
and not, oh my God, we are in, so it's tricky.
Yeah,
And I don't have easy answers, but that's the way I can look at it.
yeah, I find that very helpful. Um, it reminds me of something we were trying to teach in our last training a couple of weekends ago, where I introduced this idea of the joy of listening.
Mm,
I introduced that because I felt like too often in a focusing listening dyad, the listener was becoming over involved in the focuser's trouble.
mm,
And
mm.
almost like to be a good listener, I'm going to have to end up as troubled as them. Otherwise, I somehow haven't done it right, or
Yeah,
I've
yeah,
been irresponsible as a listener.
right.
And
That's
so I wanted to introduce that seems like a paradox a little bit, that as a listener, you can really tune in and take in where the
mm,
focuser is at and be a participant in their process without feeling the same, without losing your own joy.
mm,
You
mm.
don't, feeling as bad as the other person isn't a step forward for anyone.
Yeah, yeah, great. That's so good. That's so good. I resonate very much with that, Greg. There's a way in which we need to see I want to call the demographic of people attracted to something like focusing, who tend to be feeling people,
Mhm.
tend to be people who are empathetic to others and they're growing more empathy with others, and how easy that is to confuse with,
Yeah, exactly.
and no one is helped by that, but it is a tendency, especially of people in our demographic.
Hmm.
And this is true of healers. This is true. It's a trap.
Yeah.
It's a trap. There's a beautiful image in the Buddhist world. Maybe you've heard of Avalokiteshvara, or Kuan Yin is a Chinese name.
Yeah.
So she's viewed as the bodhisattva of compassion. That means an awakened being of compassion. And the image is so beautiful. She was born from a tear, and she has 10,000 ears to hear the cries of suffering, 10,000 eyes, 10,000 arms. But she sits in equanimity. And equanimity is not
Hmm.
turned off in any way.
Hmm.
She is hearing, rest, opening,
Hmm.
but not falling into, because
Yeah.
she knows that falling into wrecks everything for everybody.
Yeah.
And so she's a very important image for me in my inner world of, I even have a statue of her in my office where she's kind of sitting in a very beautiful repose, but very open
Hmm.
position. And I get inspiration from that image. She who hears the suffering of the world.
Yes. It makes me think that what we're pointing to is it isn't indifference, but it's maybe a little bit closer to indifference than sympathy.
Mm,
And
yes.
something of that, a step back into one's wider space.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it's a great direction. We could say first principle of Zen is not knowing,
Hmm.
not knowing. And not knowing means to hold our own story lightly and the story of others lightly.
Hmm.
So when I look back, I was just writing about this recently. It's going in my newsletter today, actually. Um, we really don't know what leads to what. When I look back on my life, my biography, a number of the really worst things, the car accident that really hurt my neck significantly, um, I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but it was essential to my development and my understanding, my experience of compassion and pain and et cetera, et cetera. And I look back at that broken heart I described at the beginning. Would I get rid of that? Wow,
Hmm.
that I don't think I would have been on that cushion. I would have been drinking beer with the boys.
Hmm.
I mean, I also did that, but it would have been more central to my college experience. So, it's hard to say what unfolds into what. So it's really wise to um, to question
Hmm.
the goodness and badness of things without turning everything into, well, I guess everything's okay.
Yeah.
No, we
Yeah.
take steps, but we don't come to conclusions
Yeah.
about, you know, and it's,
Yeah. That I feel a relief when I hear you say that, holding one's own and others' stories lightly. It's not the same as a kind of a whitewash that everything's lovely.
mm-mm,
It's just not, I mean, you can feel it bodily when
mm,
you're holding something in a way that it actually constricts. Your body immediately goes, whoa, you're making me way too small here.
yeah, yeah, beautiful. That's right. That's right. And notice your gesture goes beyond body.
Yeah.
And like we were talking about before,
Yeah.
It's like what we call in my work, the spatial body needs to be included to really have
Yeah.
closer to the totality of your experience.
Yes, that the physical body alone is too small a container for a human being.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
Thank you.
Mm.
I'm
Mm.
just I'm aware of the time. I want to just ask if there's anything that you're uh, passionate about at the moment, or anything that you especially would like to mention or say. And I'll put a link so people can find your work to make sure that they can continue on.
Mm. Wow. Well, first, I'm just mostly what I'm feeling is very grateful for you and the conversation and the it's very alive for me and engaging
Yeah, me
and I
too.
feel touched. I feel touched. So what I guess what's living mostly is that last part of just encouraging people to be aware that we live in a we are interbeing. We share a field together and our and it's if you only go back to Feldenkrais, if you only have two possibilities, you don't have a choice yet. It's very interesting. A reflex is on or off. It's this or that. It's at 3 and 4 and 5 that possibilities come. So we watch numbers of times in our dialogue. We saw, well, it's not that we're saying don't care about it. We're saying it's that the dichotomies are always way too limited. So the people who go, well, I can't open my heart when there's so much suffering in the world. I go, really? Is that true? Is that a requirement of your heart? And so, so, so one is to look at we are vaster, we are a multitude, we are vast, and we have that capacity without denying anything.
Mhm.
We can carry the light into the world. We really can. And that's part of giving back some of the gifts we've gotten from the great teachings we've gotten. Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. Thank you.
Mm. Great.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I have a way forward.
I love it. I love it. And it was delightful to talk to you, Greg.
Thank you. I really, really appreciated it. Yeah. Very grateful.
Okay,
Yeah.
so hope to meet you sometime.
Yeah, that would be lovely. Yeah.
Okay,
Thanks
take care.
again. Bye for now. Yeah. Bye.